Hey, and welcome to the 60 Liter Podcast. This show is for those with an insatiable desire to travel and to find adventure. If that's you, you'll fit right in. Here you'll find travel tips and stories that nurture your mind and soul. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the 60 Liter Podcast. This is episode 2, the financial tips and tools you'll need to travel around the world. Let's get started. Alright, the first financial tip I'll give you guys is if you have any debt, you cannot travel. Plain and simple. If you have car payments, student loan payments, house payments, whatever debt you have where you have to make monthly payments, you cannot travel until you clear out those payments, you zero out your balances, and you close those accounts out. Don't even think about going on a trip for 6 to 12 months thinking that you can maintain monthly payments and go on this grand adventure. It's just the financial responsible thing to do. Pay off your debts at home before you go on a trip. Think about it. If you're on the road for months on end and you look at your bank account every month, which you should, just seeing that monthly payment for a car, which may be in the few hundreds of dollars, it's going to be demoralizing. Seeing that money just go out and having no income and just being scared because you're losing money every month and you might go broke. It's a scary feeling. And traveling shouldn't be stressful, right? It should be an experience where you're just having the time of your life and you shouldn't have to worry about stuff like this. The second tip I'll give you guys is when the money runs out, you stop. When you're on the road and the money runs out and you see that big fat zero on your bank account, bank statement, that's when the trip stops. When you run out of money, you go back home. Don't max out your credit cards. Don't go further into debt and set yourself up for failure when you go back home. Because let's face it, everyone goes back home. Everyone has to go back home after a certain period of time. And when you go back home, you're going to have other financial responsibilities. So you don't want to go into debt for the sake of going on vacation. Because when you go back home, you're going to be in a world of hurt where you're paying off debt that you incurred for the sake of a vacation. It's just stupid. So when the money runs out, hopefully you have a return flight home that you previously bought and you could go back home. But when the money runs out, you stop. You go back home. Alright, so keeping that in mind, it's also good to remember that you have to have a certain budget mindset when you travel. That means you can't buy expensive things. You're living cheap. You can still live cheap while on the road and have a great adventure. You don't need a lot of money to travel, but people tend to make mistakes while traveling where they're tempted to buy nice things, nice souvenirs, things to take back home, or buy nice dinners that you really don't need and staying at fancy places. Just keep in mind that you're on a budget and you can't spend money lavishly and you have to live cheap and frugal. And that's really true about life in general as well, right? When you're home, you shouldn't be spending your money on stupid things, going out every night, eating out every night, and spending a lot of money on alcohol and nice restaurants and giant shopping trips. I mean, you should be living frugal anyways. So if you don't have that mindset to start with, you shouldn't go on this trip either until you get that mindset where you're willing to live cheap and frugal. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so the first thing I recommend you guys get before going on a trip are 2 credit cards. Why 2? One should be your primary and one should be a backup just in case you lose one. And with those credit cards, they should be no annual fees, have no foreign transaction fees, and have a good points reward system. And I'll explain why. Because you should use your credit card as your primary purchasing method. That should be your primary way of paying for things. Now, I know people say you should pay everything in cash because it forces you to watch your money and prevent you from overspending. And I would argue that if you have the financial discipline to live frugally anyways, using a credit card or cash shouldn't matter. It should not matter. Because if you're financially responsible and frugal, you're going to spend less even though you're using a credit card, and you're making monthly payments in full so that you're not going into debt and you're not being a victim of the interest rate that the credit card might have. So it should not matter, in my opinion. And you want a credit card with no foreign transaction fee, because if you're incurring a fee for every purchase you make, I mean, that's going to add up in the long run, and you want to avoid that while traveling, because again, you're not having any form of income come your way. You're pretty much jobless and you're going on this trip, so you really have to watch your money. You want a credit card with a good rewards program, because you need to collect those rewards and use those rewards to pay your credit card off. Because, for example, the Amazon Prime credit card lets you collect points depending on what you buy. There's a percentage difference for the type of purchases you make, and you could put those points towards your balance. And it also helps if you could get a credit card that's contactless, where it's a credit card. It's not really popular in the States, but overseas, they have contactless credit cards where you just tap it on the machine and the transaction goes through. And it's just really convenient to use those, because in a lot of European cities, I found out that for public transportation, you could also use those cards to pay for bus fares and other types of fares. And you just take your credit card, you tap it on the machine, and the transaction goes through, and it's really easy. So it's not a requirement to have a contactless credit card, but it's just a convenience factor. And another argument for using a credit card as your primary method of paying for things is that pulling cash is going to be expensive. The ATMs will charge you a fee for, every ATM in every country. In some countries, the ATMs charge you a lower fee than other countries. And for example, in South America, the ATM fees were just outrageous, where they'll make you pay somewhere between $10 to $15 for one transaction, the one time that you pull out money. And as a result, you're having to pull out a lot of money, but it also makes you a little worried because you have so much cash on you that you're afraid if you get robbed or your wallet gets lost, you're going to lose all that cash. So that's another reason I recommend using a credit card, because if you lose your credit card, you could simply cancel it and no other transactions can occur. But if you lose cash, I mean, you're kind of screwed. Although I recommend making most of your purchases with a credit card, I do also recommend taking 2 debit cards, one as a primary and one as a secondary. Same idea as a credit card. And to each of those debit cards, a checking account will be linked. And your primary checking account should be used to pay off your credit card bill. And your second checking account should be used as a reserve fund. And if you do have to withdraw from an ATM, and there will be situations where you have to because there's a business that doesn't take credit cards, or there were some national parks during my travels where they only took cash, then try to withdraw a larger amount than a smaller amount from the ATM. This will allow you to minimize the fees that are associated with withdrawing from an ATM. But don't withdraw too much from the ATM, because the last thing you want is to have money in your wallet when you're about to go from one country to another. Sure, you could go to an airport exchange or a local kiosk that exchanges money, but often you'll get charged a high fee or get an exchange rate that is not in your favor. And you don't want to have to worry about possibly losing that cash if your wallet gets stolen or lost, because things like that do happen. People get pickpocketed when they're traveling, and you want to avoid a situation like that. I always had a rule when I was in Europe: spend all the local currency you have before you go to the next country. That means spending every coin, every bill I had in my wallet. When I would go to bars, I would sometimes pay in coins. I know it would annoy some people, but I did it. And when I was paying for hostels, I would pay with coins first, then have them put the remaining balance on my credit card. Same thing at airports. When I was paying for lunch, I would ask, can I pay in coins first? Because I had too much coins and I had to get rid of them. Because there's not a lot you could do with coins once you leave the country. I mean, you could always come back and one day use the coins, but you don't know when you're going to get the next opportunity to do so. There's a funny story actually where I went to Sweden one time and I had a bunch of coins left over from that trip. So I saved them thinking I could use them when I come back. And a few years later, I went back to Sweden and I tried using those same coins again. And they told me that the money was no good. And I asked why, and they said, well, we exchanged the old money for new money, and there was a cutoff to turn in your old money and get new money. And I missed the cutoff, and they told me I could either collect it as a collector's item or just throw it in the trash. So my coins were no good. They were worth nothing. But anyways, let's go back to debit cards. So in some countries, the ATM fees are going to be outrageous, like in South America, where I was paying $15 per transaction. And I was able to avoid some of the larger fees at some of the ATMs by going to a national bank ATM. But those ATMs would often run out of money because everyone else was trying to use them. So that was one more reason for me to try to not pull money because it was too expensive to withdraw money. I think the best method of getting currency for the country that you're going to is to get it before you travel. And if you're going on a long trip, that's hard. But if you're going to Europe, where a lot of the countries use the euro as their currency, you could go to a bank here in the States to try to get the currency ahead of time. Some banks, for example, like Bank of America, offer a currency exchange program where if you have a checking account or a credit card account with them, you could buy currency for the country that you're going to. And they'll deliver it to you, to your house, or you could pick it up at the branch. Now, that's a program where even the employees don't know much about. So you might need to go on the website and take a screenshot of the policy and have it ready for the employee, because you might have to argue your case and pretty much tell them that, hey, this is your company policy, this is what I can do, so please help me out. So it's always helpful to have that handy. So basically, have 2 debit cards, but use them only when you need to, and be aware of the fees associated with using your debit card. And try to pull cash or try to get cash before you go on your trip for that specific country, if you can. Alright, and let's talk about some applications for your smartphone. So I recommend you get these 4 applications for your smartphone before you go traveling. They are PayPal, Venmo, Cash, and Apple Pay, or whatever the Android equivalent is. And PayPal's going to be very useful when you travel. For example, when I was in Europe, I tried buying some train tickets to go to a destination, and it would charge me a small fee to use my credit card, but it wouldn't charge me a fee to use PayPal, which I found to be funny because my credit card is linked to my PayPal. So I'm using my credit card pretty much to pay for my train ticket. I think it tried doing the same thing for my bus tickets in South America. So it's a good idea to have PayPal just to avoid those pesky, annoying fees. And let's say you meet some travelers and you guys go out to dinner together. Depending on the restaurant, where you're at, and the circumstance, it might be easier to just put the bill on one credit card. And the way you can have other travelers pay you back is through PayPal. There is a send money to family and friends function for PayPal, for which you can exchange money without a fee. And that comes in pretty handy because from experience, I found out that most people have PayPal. And I found out that a lot of people overseas don't really use Venmo and Cash. I don't know if it's because the apps are only available in the United States, but a lot of people don't use them overseas. But you should still have those other two apps on your phone because you might meet other Americans while you're traveling. And if you guys need to exchange money because you guys split groceries or split a meal, it's another easy way to exchange money. And finally, it's a good idea to have Apple Pay or the Android equivalent of it because it's a way to put your credit cards on your phone, and a lot of countries use the contactless readers now, so you could pay for goods and items that way. And it also comes in handy if you happen to lose your credit card. So when I was traveling, I lost one of my credit cards, and I was afraid that if I had a new one sent to the next hostel I was staying at, it might take too long or it might not even make it. So I had it sent home, then had my family members tell me the credit card numbers. Then I punched it into my phone, and I was able to use Apple Pay and the contactless readers and pay for goods that way. Just an emergency way of paying for things if you happen to lose your credit card. Alright, and those are the financial tips and tools you'll need to travel around the world. If you liked episode 2, give me a like below and leave a comment. And feel free to share this podcast with your family members, friends, whoever. Doesn't matter. Even a stranger on the streets. Let's do it. Okay, thanks for tuning in and goodbye.